This time on Road and Race, I changed the spark plugs, gearbox oil, air filter, engine oil, differential oil, coolant, and cleaned the math and throttle body. Whew. Hello and welcome to another episode of Road and Race. In this episode, I'm going to go through and thoroughly service every maintenance item on my car. I'm doing this on my 350Z, but the principle is the same for all cars. When I buy a used car, I like to go through the service history and check that everything that needs to be done has been done. I've already done a few emergency items in previous videos, such as the engine belts, brakes, and replaced the rusted chassis brace. I'd just quickly like to mention my Patreon page. If you'd like to support the show and see videos 2 days early, please check out the link in the description box. Also, please check out my Instagram and Twitter feeds. So, up first, let's start with everything that's under the bonnet. The main job I want to do is changing the spark plugs. Nissan advised doing this every 54,000 miles, and mine were last changed 26,000 miles ago. To get access to them though, we have to remove this strut bar, the engine cover, and the air intake. Since we have easy access to the throttle body, we might as well give it a quick clean. Here it is looking filthy. It's probably never been cleaned. But a quick bit of engine degreaser and it's looking like new. Also, since we have easy access to the mass airflow sensor, it's worth giving that a quick spray with cleaner to make sure it's working perfectly. The air filter was changed quite recently, as it's looking a little bit grubby, and since it's such a cheap part, I'm just going to swap it out. So we finally get access to the spark plugs. They are here under the ignition coils. The wiring harness is still in the way though, so we need to remove a few bolts to loosen it up. I like to use a little magnet on a stick to get the spark plugs out. Here's a comparison with the old spark plug with a new one. You can see how dirty the old one got. One little trick I like to use to stop the spark plug falling out of the socket is to put a little bit of gaffer tape on it, which will then hold it snugly. To get the remaining 3 spark plugs out, you just have to loosen up the wiring harness by undoing the bolts here and here. There's a hose you need to disconnect. Then you can start disconnecting the coils from the wiring harness like you did before. Next up, we'll change the power steering fluid. The easiest way to do it, I find, is to simply get a turkey baster and suck out all the old fluid from the reservoir, then pour in new fluid. With the engine on, turn the steering full lock from left to right twice, and this will mix the old fluid with the new fluid. And then we repeat the process until we've put a litre of new fluid in the system. So it's not as good as a complete flush, but it's a much easier process and it gets most of the old fluid out. As a comparison, here's the old fluid on the left compared to the new fluid on the right. So with that all done, let's move under the car, where I'll be changing the gearbox oil, the differential oil, the coolant and the engine oil. First, I'm going to change the gearbox oil. So we need to get the front of the car up in the air. My top tip is to undo the filler plug first, because you don't want to be in a situation where you've drained out all the old fluid and can't get any new fluid in. Then remove the drain bolt and watch with satisfaction as all the horrible old dirty fluid drains out of the gearbox. Then torque the bolt back to spec. I'll put all the torque settings in the description box. The gearbox holds 2.9 litres of fluid. Then transfer it into a fluid pump. Here's a comparison with the old fluid against the new fluid. Then simply pump in the new fluid until it seeps out of the filler plug. Now working our way towards the front of the car, we're going to change the engine oil. Nissan advised changing every 9,000 miles, and mine was changed 4,000 miles ago. Then remove the oil filter. I've chosen this uprated Performance Gold oil filter from K&N. So, a quick smear of fresh engine oil on the seal to help it fit properly. Then replace the crush washer and torque to spec. You need 4.7 litres of oil if you're doing an oil change with a filter change. Get the car onto a level surface and put about 4 litres in the engine. Check the dipstick and then top up until it reaches the H mark. Now on to changing the coolant. Remove the radiator cap, and we're also going to remove the coolant overflow reservoir. At this stage we can clean it out. This is what was at the bottom of mine. Unscrew the radiator drain plug, and this will get about 5 litres of fluid out, roughly half of what the engine holds. Nissan advised the coolant be changed every 3 years, and mine was last changed 5 years ago. Now, whilst you can remove 3 drain plugs from the engine block itself to get the rest of the fluid out, this is quite fiddly, awkward and messy. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fill the engine with 5 litres of distilled water and flush the rest of the coolant out. To mix up the fresh water with the old coolant, get the engine up to temperature and then rev it about 2 to 3 times. Then when the engine has cooled down, you can drain the radiator again. So now on to filling up the engine with new coolant. I'll be using a 50-50 mix of coolant and distilled water. Remove the bleed screw, which is located at the back of the engine bay, and with the car on a level surface, fill until coolant starts to spill out of the bleed hole. Replace the bleed screw, then we need to do the bleeding process to get any trapped air out of the system. I'll put the steps in the description box for you to follow. And finally we move on to changing the differential fluid. First we need to get the rear of the car up on ramps. The drain plug is here, and the filler plug is here. But first we have to get this black plastic cover off. A bit of penetrating spray to help things along. And for this job I would really advise an impact gun. A breaker bar for me just wasn't enough. Anyway, you should know the process by now. Drain the old fluid, put the drain plug back in. The diff holds approximately 1.4 litres of fluid. And then pump in new fluid until it spills out the top. Then replace the crush washers and torque both bolts back to spec. Again, the torque specs will be in the description box. So there we are. It's a nice feeling knowing that everything that can wear out on the car has now been replaced. After I did all the work, I went for a test drive, then came back and got under the car and checked for any leaks. I did the work on ramps, as you can see. Ideally you should have the car level when you do this work, but I don't like getting under the car under jack stands and I don't have a lift, So the way I did it gets most of the fluid out, so that's good enough for me. If you want guides on how to do this stuff in more detail, then I'll put a link to Series 1 and I've got step-by-step guides for each process. Also, please don't forget to be responsible and take all the used fluid to your local recycling centre. As some of you may know if you watched previous episodes, my friend Gary is faster around the track than I am. 20 seconds faster around Bedford than I am actually. And all this has to stop because I'm getting the reputation of being called Captain Slow. So, what is going to happen in the next episode is I team up with former Formula Renault driver James Heffernan, and he takes me around Bedford and shows me the essential tips and tricks for being a fast race driver. Can I beat Gary's time? If you'd like to see more videos of me repairing and modifying my 350Z, it's the top box. And if you want to see me and Gary modifying a Renault Sport Clio for the track, it's the bottom box. Please do check out the Patreon link, and as always, thanks for watching.